The door slammed shut behind Maya with a finality that echoed through the sterile halls of the glass tower. The sound was more than a simple thud. It was a verdict, a dismissal carved into the cold heart of that room. The CEO's office, perched high above the city like a fortress, was bright but icy, every polished surface gleaming with the arrogance of unchecked power. Maya stood frozen for a heartbeat, her breath steady, but her spirit trembling beneath the weight of rejection. The man she had just faced barely glanced up from his paperwork as he uttered those cruel words. "No raises for interns. You're lucky to even be here." His voice was calm, clipped, dismissive. No sympathy, no hesitation, just a blunt statement that cut deeper than any insult. Around her, the shadows of privilege seemed to grow longer, reaching out to swallow her up. The glass walls reflected a world where she didn't belong, a world where a young black woman, full of talent and grit, was reduced to a footnote, an invisible afterthought. The room was silent but charged. Whispers began to stir outside, eyes flickering with quiet judgment or pity, as if Maya's failure was already sealed in the air. She could almost feel the weight of every stare, every unspoken assumption, pressing down on her chest like an invisible fist. The cold wasn't just in the room, it was in the way she was seen, or rather, unseen. But in that stillness, beneath the sting of those harsh words, something fierce ignited inside her. It was a small flame at first, quiet, almost hidden. Her fists clenched tightly at her sides, fingers digging into her palms as if to ground herself in the moment. The flicker of that fire was caught in the reflection of the CEO's smug smile, a smile that promised victory but only revealed weakness. Because while his voice held power, his eyes could not escape the truth mirrored back at him. Maya's gaze was steady now, hard and unyielding. She was no longer just an intern. She was a force waiting to be unleashed. The glass tower, with all its gleaming surfaces and sharp angles, represented more than just a building. It was a symbol of the barriers Maya faced every day. The towering glass walls meant transparency on the surface, but hidden judgment behind every pane. Inside that fortress of wealth and influence, she was invisible, a shadow overlooked and underestimated. But shadows have a way of moving unseen, gathering strength in silence. And Maya was no ordinary shadow. She was a storm gathering behind that glass. Every word from the CEO was a reminder of the injustice built into the very structure of this place. No raises for interns, those three words were a code for something deeper. They meant the system didn't care about her dreams, about the life she fought to build. It was a system designed to keep her small, to remind her that her value was measured only in how much she could serve. But Maya's eyes did not waver. The world could shut doors in her face, but her spirit refused to break. She was already searching for another way in, a window, a crack, any opening where her fire could breathe. The hallway outside was crowded with faces, some indifferent, some sympathetic, and some openly hostile, but none could see the battle raging inside Maya's heart. The silence that followed her exit was deafening. It was the silence of 1,000 stories like hers, told and retold in boardrooms and break rooms, in every corner where ambition meets prejudice. It was the silence of being told to stay quiet, to accept less, to settle for crumbs while others feasted. But Maya wasn't built for silence. Not anymore. As she walked away from the gleaming tower, the camera lingers on the subtle details, the way her jaw tightens, the slow breath she takes to steady herself, the quiet resolve that hardens like steel beneath her skin. The world had tried to erase her, tried to make her doubt her worth, but the fire inside her would not be extinguished. It flickered brighter, fueled by every slight, every whispered doubt. This was no longer about a raise. It was about claiming her place, about standing tall in a world that told her to bow. The CEO's dismissal was meant to silence her dreams. Instead, it became a challenge. Maya's reflection in the glass as she left was a portrait of defiance, no longer the uncertain intern, but a warrior stepping into her own light. The smug smile of the man behind the door faded into the background, powerless against the determination burning in her eyes. In this moment, the story was no longer about rejection, but about resistance. The glass doors closed behind her, shutting out the noise, the judgment, and the cold. But outside, the world was still wide open. The streets stretched ahead like a battlefield, and Maya was ready to fight, to rise, to rewrite the rules that said she didn't belong. The door had slammed shut, yes, but it was not the end. It was the beginning, a spark in the darkness that promised to grow into a blaze. And as the camera fades, the final image stays with us, her clenched fists, the flicker of a dream refusing to die, the unyielding fire of a young woman who knows this isn't just about money or status. It's about dignity, about respect, about humanity. Because sometimes when the world tries to shut you out, the only way forward is to find a window, climb through it, and show them what they've been blind to all along. The days stretched on like a slow tide, pulling Maya deeper into the relentless current of the office. Months passed, one after another, each one folding into the next like pages in a book no one seemed eager to read. She was there every day, early mornings, late nights, her hands stained with the invisible ink of hard work, her mind absorbing every detail, every whispered secret that floated through the halls of the CEO's empire. Maya was no longer just an intern. She was a force growing quietly, a storm brewing beneath the surface. But still, the cold wall of indifference remained. The CEO never looked her way except to dismiss her with a sneer or a sharp word. "You're an intern," he said once during a team meeting, voice dripping with contempt. "Know your place." The words hit her like a slap, not because they were new, but because they came with that slow, crushing weight of finality. The kind that says, no matter how much you prove yourself, no matter how bright your light burns, you are still invisible in their eyes. The office was no longer just a workplace. It was a battlefield. Not with fists or shouts, but with silence that strung, with sideways glances that cut deeper than any knife, with the quiet theft of her ideas as others claimed them as their own. Her contributions vanished into thin air, swallowed by the vast machinery of power that showed no mercy, no fairness. Maya carried the weight of dismissal on her shoulders every single day. It was an invisible burden, but heavy enough to bend her back and dull her spark. She learned to hide her frustration behind a calm mask, to smile when the sting was fresh. But the fire inside her never dimmed. One afternoon, when the office lights had dimmed and the chatter had faded, she found herself standing before a trusted mentor, a rare soul who had seen her struggle and had the courage to speak truth. Her voice was barely a whisper, trembling with the exhaustion of fighting alone. "Why won't they see me?" she asked, eyes raw and searching for an answer that might make sense of the storm inside her. The mentor looked at her, eyes heavy with the weight of years and wisdom. "Because power fears what it cannot control," came the reply, slow and steady, as if the words had been carried through countless battles. The truth hung in the air between them, thick and undeniable. Power does not welcome challenge. It does not embrace those who refuse to be small. It fears the strength of a spirit like Maya's, one that cannot be boxed, labeled, or silenced. The injustice wasn't random. It was a shield, a weapon used to keep the powerful safe from change, from upheaval. Maya's name was not on their lists, not on their calendars. She was the one who had to fight twice as hard, speak 10 times as loud in the silence. But something inside Maya shifted that day. The injustice that weighed on her began to forge her spirit into something stronger, something unbreakable. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was planning. Every late night, every stolen glance at a computer screen, every overlooked suggestion was not a defeat. It was a step forward, a piece of a puzzle she was putting together in secret. The CEO's empire was vast and cold, but so was Maya's ambition. And ambition is a fire that spreads quickly. It eats through doubt and fear, burns down walls built of privilege and arrogance. The office, with its endless corridors and glass walls, was no longer a cage. It was a proving ground. Maya moved through it with quiet determination, learning the language of power even as it tried to silence her. She watched the way deals were made in hushed conversations behind closed doors, the way influence was wielded like a weapon, the way her own name was passed over like a ghost. She stored it all, turning each slight into fuel. The stolen credit for her ideas, the dismissive smiles, the casual disregard, they all became pieces of a larger story. a story she was writing in the shadows, far from the CEO's icy gaze. One night when the office was empty except for the hum of the city outside, Maya sat alone at her desk. The glow of the screen lit her face, sharp and focused. She wasn't just looking at spreadsheets or emails. She was mapping out a future, one where her voice mattered, where her work could no longer be ignored. Her fingers danced over the keyboard, weaving plans and dreams into a tapestry of ambition. The sting of dismissal was still fresh, but it was no longer a wound. It was a scar, a mark of resilience. Maya's journey was no longer about proving she belonged. It was about taking what was hers by right. Power may have its empire, but it had not yet met the strength of a spirit that refuses to bow. Maya knew the road ahead would be long, filled with obstacles built to break her will. But she had learned the secret of those who resist. Sometimes the fiercest battles are fought in silence, away from the spotlight. And sometimes the greatest victories come from those who refuse to be forgotten. The CEO's sneers and dismissals were the opening acts of a story that was far from over. Maya was ready to write the next chapter, one where she would rise, not just as an intern, but as a force unstoppable. The weight of dismissal pressed down on her every day, but it no longer defined her. It was the fire beneath her wings, the reason she soared higher in a world that wanted her grounded. Maya's eyes held a quiet promise, a flicker of defiance that said, "I am here, I am seen, and I will not be erased." The empire may be vast, but ambition is boundless, and Maya was ready to take it all. The screen blinked to life, flashing a headline that seemed impossible to believe. Former intern buys the company, CEO locked out. The words hung in the air like thunder, shaking the foundations of a world built on power and privilege. Maya's name, once whispered only in hallways and ignored in meetings, now blazed across every screen, every headline, every conversation. She had been the shadow in the corner, the quiet girl no one bothered to see. But years later, that shadow had grown into a force so strong it swallowed the very empire that once dismissed her. The same glass towers, the same polished boardrooms where her voice had been silenced, were now hers to command. The old CEO stood frozen, a statue of disbelief and shame. His eyes, once sharp with arrogance, now flickered with the slow, crushing realization that the power he clung to was nothing more than a fragile illusion. His empire, the vast kingdom he had built with ruthless ambition and cold indifference, crumbled quietly, slipping through his fingers like sand. He had thought his title was his shield, his voice the loudest in every room. But Maya had shown him that power is not owned. It can be taken. It can be earned, and most importantly, it can be lost. Maya's victory was not just about the millions that changed hands or the shiny new title beside her name. It was something deeper, something the CEO never understood. It was a testament to dignity, to resilience, to the unbreakable spirit of a woman who refused to be invisible. She was not just the boss now, she was a symbol, a reminder that respect is not a birthright of the powerful, but a prize earned through courage, grace, and humanity. The boardroom, once cold and intimidating, now hummed with a new energy. The walls that had held Maya back echoed with her footsteps as she entered, calm and assured. The room fell silent as she approached the long table, the very one where she had once sat as an outsider. The old CEO was there, standing stiffly with his head bowed, no longer the king, but a man humbled by the lessons life had forced upon him. His silence spoke volumes. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the weight of regret. Maya's voice cut through the quiet, not loud, but steady, filled with the strength of truth. "Respect isn't given because of your title," she said softly, her eyes scanning the room with quiet fire. "It's earned through your humanity." The words settled like a balm, healing wounds that went beyond the boardroom. They spoke to every person who had ever been told they were less, who had ever felt invisible or undervalued. Maya's message was clear: power without respect is empty. Titles mean nothing if they are not backed by kindness, fairness, and integrity. In that moment, something shifted. The balance in the room changed. The underdog, the girl who had been overlooked and dismissed, was no longer invisible. She was unstoppable. The old CEO's defeat was not just a personal failure. It was a lesson to all who believed that authority alone could command loyalty or respect. Maya's rise was proof that true leadership comes from humility, from the strength to listen, to learn, and to lift others up. As the meeting progressed, Maya laid out her vision, not just for the company, but for a new way of doing business. A way where voices like hers would no longer be silenced, where talent and hard work would be recognized regardless of title or background. The room, once filled with doubt and resistance, began to stir with hope. Maya's presence was a beacon, a promise that change was possible even in the most rigid places. Outside, the world watched in awe. The headline was no longer just news, it was a challenge to every empire built on exclusion and arrogance. Maya had shattered the glass ceiling, yes, but she had done more than that. She had broken the cycle of injustice, showing that dignity and respect are the foundations of true power. The old CEO remained seated, a quiet figure in the corner, watching as the company moved forward under Maya's leadership. His empire had turned, but the lesson lingered longer than any title or paycheck. Respect, he learned too late, could never be demanded. It had to be earned, and sometimes it came from the most unexpected places. Maya's story was far from over. It was a story of resistance turned to redemption, of injustice met with courage, of a young woman who refused to be less than she was meant to be. And in her rise, she carried with her a universal truth, that every person, no matter their station, deserves to be seen, heard, and respected, because dignity is not a privilege of the powerful. It is a right of all humanity. As the meeting drew to a close, the room held its breath, caught between the past and the future. Maya's eyes met the old CEO's one last time, not with hatred, but with the quiet strength of someone who had won not just the battle, but the war for justice. The empire had turned. The underdog was no longer just a shadow. She was the light blazing across the sky, unstoppable and free. Maya's story spread through the city like wildfire, reaching ears that had long grown deaf to tales of injustice. It wasn't just a story about a former intern who bought a company. No, it became a parable whispered in boardrooms, shouted in street corners, and shared in quiet moments behind closed doors, a tale of justice, courage, and transformation. People saw themselves in her struggle, in the quiet battles fought daily by those overlooked and underestimated. Her rise was no longer just about business or money. It was about something deeper, something the old CEO had never learned: the cost of pride, the price of arrogance, and the price of denying someone their worth. The CEO, once the unshakable king of his empire, was left to reckon with his fall. But his defeat was not only a loss of power, it was an awakening. He saw clearly now the harsh truth his pride had blinded him to for so long. The arrogance that had kept Maya down was also the very thing that tore his kingdom apart. The walls he had built to keep out voices like hers had cracked, and through those cracks, light and change poured in. The prejudice he wielded like a weapon became his own undoing. His story became a lesson, not just for him, but for anyone who thought power was something to hoard or use to belittle others. Maya's journey taught a universal truth, one that echoed far beyond the polished halls of corporate power. True strength, she showed the world, lies not in tearing others down but in lifting them up. Respect is not a currency to be hoarded, it is a bridge to be built. Under her leadership, the company transformed into more than a business. It became a place where dignity mattered, where voices once silenced now found a platform. Where walls built on fear and exclusion crumbled, replaced by doors flung wide open. The empire that once thrived on silence and shadows now pulsed with life and possibility. The company thrived like never before, fueled by a new spirit of respect and equality. Maya's vision was clear. Success could not be measured by profits alone, but by the humanity at its core. Teams worked not out of fear or obligation, but from pride and belonging. The culture shifted from cold efficiency to warm collaboration. Maya walked through the halls with a quiet confidence, her presence a reminder that power was not about who sat at the top, but how many people rose together. She understood what the CEO never could, that true leadership means serving others, standing with them, and recognizing their worth. And in the silence that followed the storm of change, a new legacy was born. It was a legacy written not with the ink of money or the scratch of titles, but with the hearts of those who dared to dream. Doors that were once slammed shut in faces like Maya's now opened wide, welcoming new voices, new dreams, and new hope. The dreams once denied, dismissed, or crushed beneath the weight of prejudice soared free, unbound and unstoppable. The world watched as the impossible became reality, and the underdog turned champion rewrote the rules of power. Because sometimes, the greatest victories are not the ones shouted from rooftops or marked in headlines. They are the victories of dignity reclaimed, the quiet triumphs of those who refuse to be broken or silenced. Maya's story reminds us that power taken by force is fragile, but power earned through respect is eternal. It is a truth that reaches beyond boardrooms and business deals into the very soul of humanity. When we lift each other up, we all rise. When we see each other's worth, no empire can stand in the way. The old CEO, a shadow of his former self, watched from the sidelines as Maya's vision unfolded. His pride had cost him everything, but in that loss was a chance for redemption if only he chose to learn. The world moved on, but the lesson lingered like a quiet whisper. Arrogance and prejudice carry a price too high to pay. Respect and humanity, though, build legacies that last forever. Maya's journey was far from over. It was the beginning of a new chapter for many who had once been told to stay quiet or settle for less. Her rise was a beacon, a light cutting through the darkness of exclusion and silence. It was a call to all who dreamed of more, a reminder that dignity is not a gift, it is a right. And sometimes, to reclaim that right, you have to be willing to break the silence, to challenge the system, and to stand tall even when the world tries to keep you down. As the city lights flickered outside the tall glass windows, Maya stood at the heart of her empire, not as a conqueror, but as a guardian of something far greater than wealth or power. She held the legacy of respect and equality close, knowing the battles ahead would test her again. But she was ready, because the price of pride had been paid in full, and the reward was a world where dreams once denied could finally soar free.